order the February 22nd, 2021 meeting of the Planning Commission Working Group. Ms. Cook, would you call the roll, please?
Yes. Mr. O'Connor?
I'm here.
Thank you. Mr. O'Connor is an at-large member. Ms. Leverins?
Here.
Ms. Leverins is an at-large member. Mr. Haldeman?
Here.
Mr. Haldeman represents the Berkeley District. Mr. Colster?
Here.
Mr. Colster represents the Jamestown District. Dr. Rose?
Here.
Dr. Rose represents the Roberts District. Ms. Null?
Present.
Ms. Null represents the Stonehouse District. Mr. Kropp?
Here.
Mr. Kropp represents the Powhatan District and is chair of the Planning Commission. Ms. Wortman?
Here.
Ms. Wortman represents the Community Participation Team, and we have a quorum. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cook. And as everyone has seen many times, there is now a resolution in our packet that allows us to do a virtual meeting today. And to summarize, on September the 8th, 2020, the board readopted the Continuity of Government Ordinance, which under certain circumstances permits this committee to conduct today's meeting by electronic or telephonic means without a quorum of members physically present. May I have a motion for adoption of that resolution for this afternoon's meeting?
This is Julie, so move.
Thank you. Ms. Cook, do you want to call the roll?
Yes. Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Ms. Leverins?
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman?
Aye.
Mr. Colster?
Aye.
Dr. Rose?
Aye.
Ms. Null?
Aye.
Mr. Kropp?
Aye.
Ms. Wortman?
Aye.
And motion passes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Since you have the floor, Ellen, if you'd like to introduce the staff and consultants, that would be fine. Oh, wait,
Sure,
before we do that, let me just back up for a minute. I neglected to say that we normally do not have a public comment period for this meeting. However, members of the public are welcome to submit comments in electronic, telephonic, or written form pertaining to the meeting. Ms. Cook, were there any comments submitted?
There were not any comments submitted.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for the interruption. Now you can go ahead with the introductions.
All right, thank you. Yes, I am Ellen Cook, Principal Planner, and joining me today from James City County are Paul Holt, Tammy Rosario, Jose Hibero, Thomas Wysong, Tom Leininger, and John Reisinger. Also joining us are our partners in this comprehensive plan update, our consultants Vlad Gavrilovic and Todd Gordon from EPRPC. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next on the agenda is adoption of our minutes from the December 7th, 2020 meeting. Are there any corrections, or may I have a motion to approve those minutes?
Motion to approve, Barbara.
Thank you, Barbara. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, minutes are adopted. We'll now move to the remainder from our last meeting, and that's the discussion about community character materials. Good afternoon, Mr. Hibero.
Good afternoon, Mr. Kropp and members of the Planning Commission Working Group. Thanks for having me. So as we discussed previously this evening, we'll be going over JCSAs identified by the members. We received comments from 2 Planning Commission Working Group members. So the go language. The first suggestion from Mr. Haldeman was to do with changing the language of the go to add the word health, which was discussed and it was also agreed by the Planning Commission Working Group in the last meeting. Now, Ms. Leverins has suggested including architectural in the list and saying distinctive character instead of rural small town character. So her suggested wording is, the county will be a good steward of the land by preserving and enhancing the scenic, cultural, rural, farm, forestal, natural, architectural, and historic qualities that are essential to the county's distinctive character, economic vitality, and overall quality of life of its residents. Does the Planning Commission Working Group members concur with the language suggested by Ms. Labyrinth?
If anyone would like to change that wording, please indicate. Otherwise, we'll assume there's a consensus on that. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Rivera.
All right, next page, please. Or next slide, I should say. All right, so now we turn our attention to CC2, specifically actions CC 2.1, 2.3, and 2.4. Ms. Labyrinth suggested changing the wording of these actions from encourage to a stronger term. Staff would be fine with revising this language to ensure. Does the Planning Commission Working Group concur?
Any dissent on that, or is everybody in agreement with that being a stronger word? Okay.
Rich, it's Tim.
Yes.
Just, Jose, can we scroll up a page, please, to just under the last piece that we talked about? So under CC1 1.1, we're saying ensure here. And so my question is, so can we go back to where we were, Jose? Thanks. So we're using ensure in 1.1, we're using encourage in 2.1, and I guess I'm okay with the encourage. I think that for consistency, we should get rid of ensure and maybe use encourage in 1.1, because I personally don't know how we can ensure that in 1.1, because we all have a different take on the vistas and the character and all those pieces. So that's just my comment.
So Tim, you're, just to get it straight, you're recommending that we keep encourage in 1.1 and leave it where the way it is written now in CC2 as well?
I'm fine with the word encourage, but I'm just saying for consistency's sake, in 1.1 we're saying ensure it, and down here we're saying encourage it.
Yeah, I thought staff was saying that they were okay with changing encourage to ensure also, but maybe I misheard that.
That's what I heard as well.
Yeah.
But 2.1 was also going to be ensure. Is that right, Jose?
2.1. So 2.1. That's correct.
Yeah. So Tim,
you would change to ensure.
Yeah. So we're saying that we should make them all ensure.
Oh, well, then I would prefer to stick with encourage, because I just don't know how we can ensure it with so many differing viewpoints. Just my editorial comment.
All right. Julie, since you made that suggestion, did you want to address that at all?
Let me take myself off mute first. Yeah, my sense is that we're trying to be more proactive and more active with these GSAs throughout the comprehensive plan. And when we say encourage, to me, that leaves too much wiggle room. And I'm thinking that we don't really have a big problem identifying what a viewshed is in the county. Right now, I think we probably would err on the side of calling something a viewshed as opposed to not calling it a viewshed, because that's the way the public seems to be leaning. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's not something I'm going to fall on a sword over.
There is a, this is Jack, there is a part of the comprehensive plan that actually discusses important view sheds, such as Forge Road and a couple of other places, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so, Tim, your point is to, like, for example, 2.1, encourage development in CCAs. You like that better than ensure development in CCAs, protect the natural views, and so on and so forth.
Again, unless we have specific parameters or specific guidelines, I don't know how we can ensure it when it would be subjective. Meaning, in some cases it may go to the planning director and he may or may not determine consistency. And then from the planning director, would go to the DRC or the planning commission. And again, if it's subjective and it's open to discussion and debate, I don't know how you ensure it. That's just my piece.
Okay. All right. Well, we have a.
Can I comment? I've got my hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry, Frank. I didn't see that. Go ahead.
Maybe I'm wrong about this, but each of the community characters are defined. There's buffers, there's talk about woods and things like that. And so, unless I'm wrong, we have language that is enforceable and specific to different areas of the county. And so ensuring that those standards are upheld is why that word needs to stay there.
Okay. Jack, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I think I agree with Frank. I agree with Julie. But I think the word encourage, the problem, if there is one that applies to ensure, also implies to encourage. I mean, if the definition of natural views and historic, rural, and unique character is vague, then we can't encourage that development any more than we can ensure it, I don't think. Mm-hmm. But I'm with, I think there is adequate definition in the comprehensive plan on what those things are and what the county's trying to accomplish.
Okay. Anybody else? All right, we have a recommendation. We'll go with the first recommendation to change in CC2 to change encourage to ensure. And Ellen, do you see any problem with doing a voice vote on that?
This is Julie. I think there were more instances of changing encourage to ensure in this section.
Right.
Is that right?
There were. Yeah.
So
and I guess
take each one.
Actually, what we probably should just do is say, as a general rule, where we, instead of using the term encourage in the other goals, strategies, and actions, just change it to ensure as a more proactive term.
No, I'm good with that. Thanks.
Okay, sure. So, Ellen, do you think a voice vote is okay?
Sure. Be glad to call the roll.
Okay. All right. Go ahead.
Okay.
So the motion on the floor is to change encourage to ensure throughout the goals, strategies, and actions. Okay.
Mr. O'Connor?
No.
Ms. Levering?
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman?
Aye.
Mr. Polster?
Aye.
Dr. Rose?
Aye.
Ms. Knoll?
Aye.
Mr. Kropp?
Aye.
Ms. Wortman? Aye. Motion carries. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Back to you, Mr. Ribeiro.
Yes, sir. May the next slide, please. So we have CC 3.2. And this action, Ms. Levering, Ms. Levering suggested moving 3.2 to the land use goals, strategies, and actions. Since this applies across the board, staff would be fine with moving this language to the land use chapter. Does the Planning Commission Working Group agree?
Is everyone in agreement? Please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Opposed? And I don't see any hands up, so okay.
All right. Okay. Next slide, please.
Jose? Excuse me, just a couple. I submitted earlier on number 3.1, CC 3.1, to change the language. It says the same thing, but here we go again. But from encourage, I would strike encourage and put protect vistas and other scenic resources that, and then scratch to be protected, and encourage building site, blah, blah, blah. So it would read protect vistas and other scenic resources and encourage building site and road designs that enhance the natural landscape. And then on and on.
All right, I'm going to be the devil's advocate, and you're saying encourage plans that enhance the natural landscape. Are you going to ensure that the plans enhance the natural landscape?
No, this is a different one, Rich.
Oh, okay.
This is CC 3.1.
3.1, right. Mm-hmm.
It's, I'm reading it, it says encourage vistas and other scenic resources. I would change it to protect vistas and other scenic resources, and then scratch to be protected. So you just lead with protect instead of encourage. It's protect vistas and other scenic resources and encourage building site and road designs, blah, blah, blah.
And that's why I was commenting on you saying encourage building site and road designs. It just seems like we're not consistently applying the word encourage and ensure, but there's but I guess there's less, and I don't want to turn this into a wordsmithing session.
I don't need it.
So I'm fine with the suggestion that Jack made. I see some other hands. Julie?
Yeah, thank you. Jack, I totally agree with your rewording. And the motion that we just passed sounded like we were changing the word encourage to ensure throughout the GSAs. And we didn't say just these GSAs. So we probably should clarify that.
I guess we were talking about the community character GSAs, and then as the other sections come up, we can deal with that depending on the subject. Does that make sense?
It does, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood, because the actual wording of the motion was throughout the GSAs, which could apply across the board to everybody.
Sure. No, that's a good catch, Julie. Thank you. Okay. So Jack has made the suggestion regarding the wording on 3.1. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No, Tim.
All right. Thank you, Tim. Jenny, you had your hand up.
I did. It may be now too late since we just voted. But you could say encourage protection of vistas and other scenic resources and ensure that building site and road designs enhance the natural landscape and preserve valued vistas. I think by the actions of the Planning Commission, you could probably ensure that when people come to you, right? Maybe not. But anyway, that was my, I'm going along with this encourage versus ensure thing.
Mm-hmm. Would you repeat your suggestion again, Jenny?
You could say protect vistas and other scenic resources and ensure that building, site, and road designs enhance the natural landscape and preserve valued vistas.
All right. That reads fine to me. Anybody else?
That's fine with me too.
Okay.
This is Frank again. I got my hand raised.
Yep, come on. Go ahead, Frank.
The reason I disagreed with Tim was that I can go to the current comp plan and I can go to the land use section on community characters and corridors, and it is spelled out whether it's a wooded community character or an agricultural or whatever, or whether it's in the community areas, whether it's in Tohanna or wherever. But there's specific language that the word ensure ensures. It's a standard. And so that's why I disagreed with Tim. So unless we have some stated standards in the text of the land use chapter, then we need to be careful about how we use the word ensure, because we're asking the staff to pass a judgment on whether or not it complies with the comp plan. And so they can go and say, okay, here's a rural road, or here's this, and this is the standard. And it's up to them to enforce it so that when they come back with a report or they get something in there, they have something to stand on.
So you're not disagreeing with Jenny's rewording, are you, for 3.1?
I'm not, but I'm making the point that when we use that word in the context of how it's being used is, do you have something that's enforceable or a standard?
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Any other?
And Frank, that's exactly to my point, because, you know, we're all going to have a different thought process as to what a scenic resource or a vista is. And, you know, and what enhancing a natural landscape is. So, you know, again, that's exactly the reason why I'm opposed to using the word ensure, because from a developmental perspective, we have tried, you know, and it's sort of like this whole piece about incorporate character design guidelines into the ordinance. Well, what happens if we want to change those? Now, instead of just changing a guideline, we have to change the whole ordinance. So, you know, we, from a design perspective, from a if I'm submitting a plan, then this really just makes it that much harder for me to do that work for my client. If I'm a landscape architect, if I am a civil engineer trying to do a site plan, you know, all we're going to do is end up making these people come back to the table multiple times. And, you know, I just from a value perspective, you know, we've heard so much about, you know, making sure that we codify things so people know. I feel like we're going in the opposite direction. Just my 2 cents.
I'm going to invite either the consultant team or the staff to weigh in if they have any thoughts on this, especially in regards to how maybe other jurisdictions in Virginia deal with that issue. Of just throwing it out there in case anybody would like to make a statement, make a comment.
This is Vlad. Just to offer a perspective from other jurisdictions. Typically, from what I've seen, comprehensive plans tend to be in the should and probably more encourage language, just because comprehensive plan is a policy document and there are no ways to actually enforce comprehensive plan policies. It doesn't mean that what you were proposing to do, there'd be anything wrong with. You have a lot of freedom under state code to write it the way you want. So,
thank you, Vlad. That was helpful. I'm going to turn to the working group then and see if get some feedback from you all. Do you want to continue with the insure discussion, or are you comfortable after all with the way the GSAs have been written with the word encourage? I know we've taken a straw vote, but these are non-binding in a sense. This is a fluid discussion. So if anybody wants to revisit that, to Tim's point, please speak up.
Well, since I cited the comp plan, the current comp plan technical language is as it applies to the word ensure for community characters and for community character corridors, areas and corridors, I'm happy with the specific language that we have currently to specific areas of the county, whether it's a suburban or landscaping issue, whether it's Tohana or Green Spring, or whether it's an agricultural. Those guidelines to me are the things that I want to ensure that when something comes in, we are in conformance to those specific guidelines that we have in the current comp plan.
Okay. Jenny, you had your hand up?
Yes, thank you. I'm just looking at, I'm beginning to waffle. So I'm just looking at 3.4, and I see the word encourage in 3.4.1, developers. So to Tim's point, there are plenty of things that we can't ensure because we have no control over them. So maybe it's too sweeping to say we should change every encourage to ensure.
Yeah, I think I think you make a very good point. And so then what that will do is it'll take us back to the beginning of the discussion, and we'll just have to go item by item and for any corrections, I think. Paul, I see your hand is up.
Well, I was just going to add to the conversation. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the working group. Good afternoon. So, you know, I think as Vlad mentioned earlier, I mean, if it helps in the discussion, it seems like we're getting pretty hung up on one word versus another. But as Vlad mentioned, this is just a long-term policy document. And so a lot of these are going to be considered in the realm of legislative application. So, ultimately, whatever word is used, ultimately, when that legislative action comes up for a vote, individual PC members and individual board members will get to decide and will get to confirm via their vote their feelings on how well a specific proposal meets the comprehensive plan. Also, too, at the end of the day, this language is going to apply pretty directly for legislative cases, but you all are going to get another in-depth crack at all of these when we move into the implementation phase. I mean, that's really where the rubber meets the road on all of the by right potential. And, ultimately, a lot of these details about should it say this or should it say that, I mean, again, all of that will be part of a conversation later on as we look to move these goals, strategies, and action items into the ordinance or into policy. I mean, these, again, all of these right now are just GSAs. These aren't implementation items. So, I think ultimately the staff wants language in there that the PCWG is comfortable with, that there's consensus of, but, picking one word for the other, today really isn't the end all be all. And you'll get another chance to kind of come back to all of these chapters one last time and take a look at the very final language. I know we've got a lot we want to get through today talking about land use, which has some big picture items that we want to make sure we're saving time for, but I figured I would just sort of throw that perspective into the mix to whether it's helpful or not helpful.
It is. Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Rob, I saw your hand up earlier.
Yeah, I lowered it after what Paul said.
Okay. Tim?
I was just going to offer, I'm fine with choosing proactive words like promote or something to that effect. I just, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to belabor it, but if you put something in front of me that says, we've adopted a comp plan that says we have to ensure X, Y, and Z, to me, that's taking away some of that subjective piece. So again, I don't care what the word is. To me, ensure means guarantee, and I just don't think that's appropriate. That's all.
And we also, to Paul's point about that, we still have round 3 feedback due from the public that could also inform our decision. Ellen, go ahead, please.
Yes, I wonder if the working group would be comfortable with us relooking at the language for the specific ones Ms. Levern had suggested, and then looking back at the other GSAs, and instead of perhaps a uniform changing of encourage, to ensure we could relook at the sort of appropriateness, or if there's any distinction where perhaps it might make sense in a different location, and come back to you for the final version with our recommendations. And if you all were comfortable with that, perhaps we could look at 3.1 and see whether Ms. Wortman or Mr. Haldeman's suggestion was comfortable for the group.
Okay, I think that sounds like an excellent idea. I see Julie has her hand up.
Yes, thank you. And I wholeheartedly thank you, Ellen. I think that's a wonderful idea. But I would ask you to be very careful when the word is followed, whatever we choose, promote, encourage, is followed by the word development, because that could be misconstrued as to promote development.
Okay.
Right.
All right. So what we've left it as is staff's going to take a look based on our discussion, and we'll be getting another cut on this, and so they'll make an effort to change words appropriately to be proactive, but in the appropriate context. And so what we have on the table then is CC 3.1 rewording that Jack suggested. Is that everybody's understanding at this point?
Jack and Ginny.
And Ginny, I'm sorry. Yep. So Ginny, since you were the last speaker, would you mind rereading CC 3.1 one more time?
Sure. Protect vistas and other scenic resources and ensure that building, site, and road design enhance the natural landscape and preserve valued vistas. Now that was my suggestion, but maybe it's been undone by this discussion.
No, I don't think so. And any comments on that? And Ellen, I don't know if you still have your hand up to make an additional comment.
I apologize.
Oh, that's okay. Okay, that's fine. Okay, all those in favor of the change that Ginny just read, please say aye. Aye.
Perhaps we could amend that with Ellen's suggestion to also go through all of these GSAs and look at the wording of encourage versus promote versus.
Well, I thought staff was going to do that offline and bring it back to us.
Well, so that would be on top of this change.
So they would also be glad to do that.
Okay. Okay, great. Thanks. Sorry.
Okay. So any dissents on CC 3.1?
Just me.
Okay.
Me too.
All right. The change does carry, and there will be another opportunity to take a look at the wording when staff comes back with their revisions to encourage and ensure in similar terms. Okay, that was very painful. Mr. Ribeiro.
All right, we're almost done.
Okay.
Next page, please. All right, so this is CC 4.1.2. Mr. Haldeman suggested adding the phrase "and wildlife habitats and migratory routes" to the end of this action. Staff would be fine adding this language. We also note that there may be some additional tweaking to the set of actions under CC4 before the final version based on the open space and rural character preservation briefing paper and a desire to coordinate language between this chapter and the land use chapter. Planning Commission Working Group members, any questions?
Any questions for Jose? Tim?
I'm sorry, I left my hand up, but
okay. Okay.
I do object to the call out of the of the PDR. I just, but that's me. So,
could you elaborate on that, Tim? The call out of the PDR.
Oh, in 4.1.2, it talks about as funding becomes available. Mm-hmm. It says PDR, green space, or other programs and it says encourage participation by landowners. Mm-hmm. I just don't think it's our job to encourage that participation. If those programs are available, they're available. It's like the AFD or other pieces. If those programs are out there, I don't think it falls to the county to encourage it. I think it falls to us to educate and have it available for those who want to take advantage of it.
Okay. Any discussion on Tim's point? So I'm just looking to see if there's a way to as funding becomes available for the PDR program, encourage participation. Would it be better just to say ensure publicity efforts are made or undertaken or something like that without encouraging participation, but just make sure that there's some publicity as funds become available? Would that be more palatable without diluting the recommendation?
Rich,
Ginny, pardon?
I'm sorry. I recognize I'm in the minority on it. I just think that we are closing the door to other options that are available to us by specifically calling out individual preservation programs. So,
okay, so you'd be more comfortable without listing specific programs, but just discuss in an umbrella term like land preservation programs or something like that?
Correct.
Okay. Ginny?
I think I'm probably showing my ignorance here, but this second sentence that says, consider acquiring land that's adjacent to other protected parcels. Is that only part of the PDR program, or is that, what I'm wondering is whether that sentence then changes or is still relevant if Tim's suggestion were adopted.
Okay.
Considering acquiring the land, I guess.
Yeah. Jose, did you want to address the intent of that acquiring the land sentence? Or Tammy? Hi.
This is Ellen. I can weigh in. This is Tammy.
Okay.
I think what the second sentence is trying to suggest is that connected networks of green space are more robust and effective than single pieces throughout. And so a single piece of land might have utmost importance in terms of protecting an historic quality or one particular resource, but a connected network is much stronger altogether, and that's all that was trying to get to.
Okay, would it be more clarifying, and I'm not skipping Tim's comment, but just to say to facilitate the creation of a connected network of green infrastructure, or is that just getting too wordy?
I like that.
I like that.
Okay.
I like it.
Okay. Well, then that could be a suggestion, but and I see Frank has his hand up, as does Julie. So Frank,
I was going to bring this up later when we get to the land use piece of the Tammy's program that's in there, and part of my issue is the criteria that we use to decide what land conservation program we use, whether it's any of these or a TDR or a state program. one of the things that's interesting that I think she's trying to do is get some money together to put a set of standards together so she can compete. But when you go back and you look at the criteria and ranking of these programs to be able to get these funds, they do give you points when you're doing this adjacent piece. So it's just not a philosophic thing. It's if you're going to compete successfully for whatever program you're going to use on the state level, there are a series of criteria that we should be using to decide which one of these land conservation projects we're going to use, regardless of whatever the funding mechanism is. And so I've got a problem with not defining what it is we want to protect. And if protecting something adjacent to a current facility is something that gives us point when we come to evaluate it on a county level, yes. But this statement leads to a whole bunch of other things.
You're talking about 4.1.2?
Exactly, in the last sentence there. So It isn't an issue so much of putting this in there, but what are the other criteria? And there are more that the state has. So when we go to ask for the Virginia Land Fund Foundation to have matching funds for a PDR or green space or whatever, that's how they're going to evaluate it. And we ought to have the same sort of language in ours.
So how would you recommend, what would you recommend that language?
I'm just suggesting at this point, leave it off. Because you don't have enough right now of a discussion to be able to talk about all those other things.
So you're saying delete that last sentence?
Yeah, exactly. And then take care of it when you get to the land use piece and you start talking about the criteria that you're going to use to protect the land. Let the land use piece take care of it.
Well, okay, that's that I disagree with that. I feel that it doesn't hurt to emphasize a connected green infrastructure in other areas as well. I don't think it's a mutually exclusive issue, and so I probably don't agree with deleting that last sentence. So we'll have to do. We'll definitely vote on it. Julie has her hand up, and I wanted to give her a chance to speak, and then I also wanted to talk a little bit about Tim's suggestion of removing the actual programs that are named in this action item. So
Frank, I'm sorry. I do just want to say I do understand where Frank's coming from, and I actually, agree with it. So if we have, again, this goes back to the prior conversation. I think the more that we can define those things, then the easier it is for everybody to understand. So, I just think that's what Frank's trying to get to, is that, we should reference or advocate for those things that get us more points. I don't know the program as well as Frank does, but to get us more points and more likely to have that funding approved. So
I guess I don't understand why deleting that last sentence has any impact on whether we could take advantage of programs or not that are out there.
Not inclusive. It's only one aspect, and there are lots of other things.
Yeah, I just think.
Okay,
I think what he's saying is it's limiting, and there's a bunch of other criteria that we could or should consider.
Okay, I see what you're saying. You're saying that
adjacent.
An interconnected green infrastructure is one of many tools that are out there. And so you don't like the idea of just singling one out to the exclusion of the others. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, correct. And so when we get to the land use, we talk about using mapping technologies, and in one paper we're talking about using the DCR. So when you go and look at those map layers, they're very specific about criteria that you have to match. And one of the factors that are in the Echo Core thing is this connectivity that she's talking about.
Okay.
And so if you're going to propose something to the state for funding, they're going to say, do you comply with the DCR? I mean, the language is rather specific on that. It says you have to be able to show that the project was evaluated based on the percentage of the local total project area that is included in the Conservation Virginia Agriculture and Forestry category. I mean, and it's a land map thing that has our county mapped out already. And so that's why she listed all those different map layers, because those are the sort of criteria that we're going to be using specifically to get the funding. Okay. And so if you're going to have a green infrastructure, a green space program, a TDR program, or a PDR, and you're going to be using other people's money to compete with, you ought to know what your criteria is, and this one's limiting.
Okay. Thanks for the clarification. Julie?
Yeah, thank you. This has been a very interesting discussion. I was actually thinking that the second sentence ought to be its own GSA, because that to me is almost a separate effort. But I think maybe we could ask staff to reword this based on the discussion that we've just had. I like the idea of not specifying the individual programs, because there may be new programs that come up in the next 5 years. So if we simply say land preservation programs. But I do like the idea of somehow mentioning that we would like to create a network of green infrastructure. And I think that could be its own GSA.
Or to Frank's point, that could be addressed more fully in the land use section, is what I think. But I see Ellen has her hand up, so let me.
Infrastructure, I think the green infrastructure is also part of community character, so I think it does belong here.
Ellen?
Yeah, yes, and to the point just made, the environment chapter, the community character chapter, and the land use chapter, among others, have kind of mentioned some of these concepts, and we'll, as staff, want to go back and relook at what's in each of them as we talk to you more about the open space and rural preservation paper. I do think that potentially we could table the discussion and have that discussion first and look at the draft GSA language. There's a specific new GSA in the land use chapter that touches on some of these. Staff would be glad to go back and revisit this language and take on board your comments here. I think overall, we, to the point of developing a framework, there's probably a certain level that's appropriate within the comprehensive plan and within its GSAs, and then another whole level that would be programmatic and probably something that would be after the comp plan as the programs develop and specific criteria are put on paper, so to speak. So just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, thank you. And that's very helpful. So what the suggestion is let staff go back and take a look at the linkages to the other sections, the other chapters, as well as looking at the GSA wording that we've been thrashing about this afternoon so far, and come back to us with some edits or additional recommendations. Is everybody okay with that approach?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Anybody not? All right. Thank you all. Mr. Ribeiro, please continue.
Sure. Thank you. Next page, please. CC 5.4. There was a question about the need for action CC 5.4, which is an action to re-examine street tree provisions in the zoning ordinance. This GSA was added based on an earlier Planning Commission working group discussion of possible issues with street trees within higher density developments. We believe that was brought up by Mr. O'Connor. So we're just trying to address that.
Okay. Tim, did you want to, I remember you did have a comment about the streetscape policy, narrow streets and so on. Would you mind just summarizing that again to refresh everybody?
Sure. I think there's two parts to streetscape. it extends beyond trees. It just talks, for me, it's if we're trying to create connectivity between neighborhoods, internal to the neighborhoods to keep people off the main streets, then we need to look at road widths, because often we're very minimal on street widths. I'll pick on Whitehall for one. Two cars can't pass down the street because of the alleyways and the rear load garages. So, that's a big part of it. And then, I just think we need to be careful because we're creating, we're putting trees into the road right of way, which belongs to VDOT, of which VDOT does not necessarily maintain them. So I just think we need to be cognizant of that and look for those areas where it's beneficial, but doesn't necessarily, where we have reduced setbacks and narrow roads isn't necessarily beneficial, because it heaves curbs, it heaves sidewalks, it creates a host of problems, and not when it's planted, but in 5 and 10 years down the road.
Sure. Now, so are you comfortable with this particular action item 5.4 to evaluate the appropriateness of the street trees? Are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Mr. White can, handle that easily enough when, when he's evaluating applications.
So then if I don't hear any dissenting voices, we'll go ahead with that action item as it is. Everybody all right with that?
Yep.
Okay. All righty. Okay, Mr. Rivera.
All right. Finally, there were a number of other comments, but they were mostly grammatical edits or to improve the flow and clarity of the language. Mm-hmm. And staff would be more than happy to make those changes. And those are all the changes that we would like to share with the members of the Planning Commission working group. And I thank you very much for your guidance today.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. That was a tough chapter to deal with for sure. So thank you very much. Any other questions before Jose calls it a night and has a cocktail? All right. Thank you all. We next move into the land use chapter materials. Ellen, did you want to introduce it, or Thomas, did you want to just kick it off?
Pass it right to Thomas.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd be happy to kick things off. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. All right, that's a good start. Well, good afternoon to the working group. My name is Thomas Weissong. I'm a senior planner here with the county. Alongside me is Tom Leininger, who is also a senior planner. And tonight, what's that?
You were breaking up, Thomas.
Oh, okay. I will try to see what I can do. I am on the phone, so hopefully you all can hear me now.
Yes, that came in a little clearer. Thank you.
All right, I won't move. I'll stay put. Tom is here tonight with me, and tonight we will be presenting the land use materials for your consideration and discussion. Next slide, please. Today, staff will be presenting a number of items for the land use section for your consideration and discussion, including revisions to the technical report, a summary of community guidance received thus far, the open space and rural character preservation analysis, the economic opportunity area analysis, the land use map descriptions and development standards, and the goals, strategies, and actions. Next slide, please. Staff has incorporated comments from the December working group meetings. For the technical report, the two major incorporations are that the short-term rentals portion was revised to clarify expectations for this particular use, and that references to the character design guidelines were incorporated where relevant within the technical report. Next slide, please. Staff has also included the community guidance summary received thus far, and I won't be giving an entire summary of that guidance, but I will speak to the high-level points. Respondents to the Establishing Our Goals questionnaire were asked to review the 2035 land use goal, and of the responses received, a little over 70% said the goal should remain the same, and just over 20% said it should be changed. What's interesting is that of those preferring change, 14 emphasized maintaining the character of the community by discouraging new development and promoting infill and redevelopment of properties, which is similar to some of the other input we've received. And 3, support developments which meet certain county needs, such as affordable housing and job creations. And regarding the scenario B testing, there was considerable support for the quality of life aspects of that scenario. Next slide, please. There have been a number of changes made to the land use map descriptions and development standards. This item, along with the analysis papers for rural preservation and economic opportunity, will each have their own brief presentation tonight. And I'm going to refer to the land use map description and development standards as the DDS, just to save a little bit of time. So hopefully that works out for you all. For the DDS, the high level changes so far are the following. Per guidance from the working group, the open space and recreation designation has been tentatively revised. The rural lands designation language has been revised, and a rural land development concept rendering has been included as an example. The low density residential and moderate density residential descriptions have been revised. Notably, the moderate density residential description specifies level 1 and level 2. And there's also a low density residential concept rendering included within the packet. The commercial and industrial designation descriptions have been revised, and the mixed use descriptions have been revised. And of course, we'll go into more detail here in a little bit, but if we could move on to the next slide, please. There's a brief summary of the goals, strategies, and actions. The following strategies and actions were added per the working group's recommendation. An action exploring the creation of a solar and wind ordinance has been included. And there's also a number of actions that were included for implementing recommendations within the Fort Eustis Joint Land Use Study. And I won't go through all of those because there's quite a few, and I'm sure we'll get into that when it comes to the GSAs. But an action for facilitating master planning for strategic areas within the county has also been included, and we'll touch on that within the EO paper, as well as a strategy for encouraging development within the EO designation per expected standards. There's also been various changes to the strategy for rural lands tools, and there's been a new strategy for developing tools for targeted open space preservation within the PSA that would work in concert with the tools in rural lands, which I think Mr. Polster was maybe referencing earlier. Moving on to the next slide, please. We've got a new land use goal that's been drafted, which is to achieve a pattern of land use and development that reinforces and improves the quality of life for citizens by encouraging infill, redevelopment, and adaptive reuse within the PSA, limiting development on rural and natural lands outside the PSA, and achieving the other 8 goals of the comprehensive plan. And if we can move on to the next slide, we've got questions. And that's a very high-level view of what is in your packet. There is certainly a lot of information to discuss tonight, so staff plans to have a bit of a structure in the beginning before we open things up for your broad discussion in the middle and the end. So to start with, we'd like to see if there are any questions that are specific to the technical report revisions or the community guidance portion of the packet. And from there, we can move on to the presentation and discussion of the open space and rural character preservation analysis, which Vlad will be doing for us. Then I'll give a very brief overview of the economic opportunity area analysis, and then we can dive into the DDS. And if we have time, we can get to the goal, strategies, and actions towards the end. Okay. So of course, there's quite a bit of overlap there and connection between these items. So if I may, I'd pause and ask the working group, are there any questions regarding the revisions to the technical report or regarding community guidance?
Anyone? No? Mr. O'Connor.
Just one quick one. Thomas, I think it was the technical report. I was thinking it was the community guidance where you talked about receiving responses. In the opening paragraph, it was in percentages, and then in the text, it talked about receiving 14 responses, and I think another 3 responses. But I don't know if they were individual responses or percentages, and I think we should just make it consistent. That's all.
Is that any concerns about that, Thomas?
No, that's a helpful clarification we can make. I don't know if John wants to flip back to that slide for us to refer to, but I believe that was of the people who wanted to change the goal. That was the number of responses and not the percentage. I don't know if that addressed Mr. O'Connor's question, but certainly helpful to make sure we're being clear here.
Okay, okay. So,
right. I just think
Tim, you just dropped off.
Sorry about that. I was just going to say, you know, we talk about 70% and 20%, and then of those preferring change, it's, you know, 14 each and 3 each. And I just think that we should be consistent in saying that 14 represent, you know, 14 is, you know, 5% or 10% or whatever that number is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, I see. Yes, that's a really good point for sure.
Okay. So so you'll take a look at that and adjust accordingly. I don't know if you wanted to leave 70% and then in parentheses put the number of respondents, or if you just want to put percent consistently all the way through, but you'll just take a look at that and adjust accordingly. Is that right?
Exactly. Yes, we can make sure that we're being consistent and clear throughout the document so that everybody knows the percentage and the numbers. That's a really good recommendation.
Okay, good. Frank?
I'm a little confused on the technical report, Thomas. Are we talking about future land use map description and development standards? Is that the technical document you're talking about?
No, sir. We'll be discussing that in a little bit. This was the this is the previous document that you all looked at back in December and made recommendations, and we made some pretty simple revisions on the short-term rental, and then we also referenced the character design guidelines. So not too much has occurred there, but wanted to check and see if anybody had any questions on that at this point.
No, that's fine. I just want to make sure I knew which document we were talking about.
Okay, good. Anybody else? Okay, Thomas.
All right. Well, if Vlad is available, we have him next up to talk about the rural character preservation paper. So Vlad, are you on the line and able to have me hand things over to you?
Yes, thank you, Thomas. Good evening, afternoon. This is Vlad Gavrilovic, GPR. I'm going to probably share a screen myself so that I can kind of walk through the pages, if that's okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, again, just to give you kind of a higher level overview of this, I want to spend about 8 or 9 minutes on this and really welcome any comments. Feel free to interrupt if you have questions or answer any questions after the overview. So the purpose of this is something that staff asked us to do as part of our scope, really to study open space and rural character preservation in the context of James City County's policy framework and long-term legacy, establishing policies for this preservation. The purpose of this was to kind of learn, compare, and consider. So learn from what others were doing, what the statewide kind of landscape, if you will, of rural character preservation was. Compare kind of how the different tools in a toolkit approach worked in other communities and worked in James City County, and consider some recommendations. So there's 2 parts, analysis and recommendations. I'll just focus on some of the kind of summary charts. And we went through peer communities and showed what they had done, and then came up with this framework looking at 5 basic categories of tools: regulatory measures, tax assistance, purchase of land, transfer of development rights, and economic development for rural preservation. And then showed who was doing what, including James City County within those basic categories. And then looked at a statewide kind of toolbox with individual tools within that, within those categories. And then kind of looked at which ones James City County has done in the past. And then did kind of a qualitative assessment of the effectiveness of these tools through challenges and benefits, with the darker colors being the highest challenges in orange and the highest benefits in green here, just to see kind of which tools were maybe hardest to administer, but maybe provided the best benefits and vice versa. And then we looked at kind of a qualitative assessment of James City County's current open space and rural character preservation toolbox, with measuring kind of their effectiveness, the greatest challenges and the greatest opportunities on all of these. So we also included considerations from the public input and from the scenario testing exercise, and took all of this kind of analysis into a series of potential policy implications, such as pursuing more compact, less dispersed patterns of development to mitigate the impact to these sensitive areas, limiting growth in the rural lands and directing it into the PSA, ensuring the protection of some of the remaining areas of rural landscape that were also within the PSA, encouraging larger proportions of new development to be in compact communities, mixtures of densities, looking at infill redevelopment, stronger standards and controls for new development to preserve rural areas and traditional character, additional standards for setbacks, buffers, consideration of reducing some portions of the PSA areas, and exploring the potential of adding elements to the rural lands policy framework about the central well requirement, particularly if this was eliminated, to look at some mitigating measures to ensure that the pace of rural development would increase if the central well requirement was eliminated. And you'll see a lot of these reflected in the recommendations. So the recommendations started off with some basic big picture guiding principles, if you will. Showed kind of the pace of residential development over time, every decade. Interesting that a lot of the development has actually occurred outside the PSA as well as inside the PSA. The basic structure of the recommendations, first and foremost, was supportive zoning. And here there's some specific recommendations that I'm sure you'll want to consider and discuss, that based on kind of practice of other communities that have successfully protected rural character, they tend to have very low density zoning, considerably lower density than the 3-acre currently in the A1 district in James City County, more along the lines of one house per 20 or 25 acres or more. Then there were supportive utility policies, and this basically talked about putting language in the comprehensive plan that the utility policies should be in step with the growth management policies of the county and should support growth management and rural character preservation. And then suggestion that if the central well requirement is modified or eliminated, that some compensating actions be done, such as revising the zoning to ensure that the pace of rural development doesn't increase as a result of lower development costs, as Loudoun County did, as Stafford County is considering doing. And then two others, supportive rural preservation programs, such as the PDR and rural economic development programs to support a rural economy. And finally, some recommendations within the PSA. So those recommendations outside the PSA in the rural lands. Within the PSA, having clear objectives and mapping for preservation. That's related a little bit to the discussion you all were just having, but really studying kind of the kind of green infrastructure and recommending new GSAs to consider a comprehensive green infrastructure mapping of natural resources, providing clear guidelines in the development review process for preservation, such as preservation of vegetation, environmental features, policies and standards for the purchase of development rights program. And that again is related to funding sources and one observation I would make in that is that different funding sources and funding opportunities have different standards. Generally find that it's better to create what standards will be will be customized to the county and could apply to all these different funding sources. And then when an individual funding opportunity comes up, really refine those so that they address that funding opportunity. And the last part was really recommendations that were specific for GSA revisions, such as revising the specific zoning districts to lower the densities and revising the rural cluster provisions accordingly to allow those lower densities. There was a set of specific recommendations within and without the PSA that followed on these. I won't go through all those because I think those have been covered in the other recommendations. So I appreciate your patience and be happy to answer any questions.
Great. And before I open it to questions, I do want to compliment you and everybody who worked on that analysis paper. That was, I think, exceptionally well done. It was very interesting. It has a wealth of information in there that we can use as we move forward with this comp plan process. So thanks very much, Vlad. Now I see several hands up. Let's see here. Jack.
Hi. Yes. First of all, I second Rich's comments. This is a great document, and I think not for the first time, you've really captured the sense of the residents of James City County as expressed throughout this CPT program. So I just think it's a great document, very helpful to me. And I have one nit and one small question, actually, but the question is, there are a couple comments referring to the central wells, but nothing regarding sewers and septic systems and so forth. I've always kind of looked at them, as a pair. Could you comment on that, please, Vlad?
Sure, Mr. Holman. Yeah, we focused on central well, but that's a great point. And a lot of what's been done for growth management and utility policies has been much more in sewer and septic requirements than in central well or water requirements. We could definitely, and I think we are doing some research now to enhance this on what different counties are doing for utility policies. And I'm sure that a lot of those will actually be wastewater rather than drinking water.
Okay. Thank you. My second is a suggestion under potential policy implications. Number 2, limiting new growth in the rural lands and directing it to the PSA to ensure that there will always be, there's that word, ensure. Good. When you say directing it to the PSA, I don't think we want to actively direct development in the or at least population growth into the PSA. We do want to encourage what residential growth there is to go into numbers 4 and 5, that is compact communities and mixture of densities and directing new growth into infill and redevelopment. But I kind of winced when I read that. I don't think we certainly want to limit new growth in the rural lands, but not necessarily direct the overflow into the PSA. That's just my sense. And this whole document, those my only 2 comments, which is a reflection on the quality of the work, I think.
While you're on that, Jack, this is Rich, if I can get a clarification, I had thought that scenario B was specifically doing that, directing new growth into the PSA.
Yeah, it is. I just object to it, that's all.
Oh, okay. All right. So you're not asking for an edit to the document, you're just editorializing about the document.
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not asking for an edit to the document. Through this all, Paul gave a great explanation of this a couple of meetings ago, but we have to keep the future population at 120,000, both in A and B, just so the whole analysis comes out with apples to apples.
Mhm.
But I think our final document needs to do something to keep the potential for population growth well under 120,000, or we will not be fulfilling the wishes of our fellow residents.
Yeah,
And
I agree with you on that. Yeah.
and so and we can't do that if we're going to say, okay, we're going to whatever kind of limitations in the rural lands, and take the differential between what it would have been and what it is after we make our revisions, and actively direct those people into the PSA in general. I don't know. That's just me.
Ellen, I saw you put your hand up.
I'm sorry. I seem to have something malfunctioning here. I do not have a comment. Thank you, though.
Oh, okay. Frank?
As I'm trying to sort out how these tools are applied, I'm having a little bit of difficulty with the way we're defining things like open space and green infrastructure, and what programs they may include. So could you give me, Vlad, your definition of green infrastructure and what it means?
Sure. And there are, whole institutes on this, but I think in a nutshell, green infrastructure is the environmental resources that the county has, things such as wetlands, waterways, stream areas, sensitive environmental features, and species.
I don't mean to disagree with your definition, but most of the literature talks about it a little bit more holistically in terms of ways and means to protect the ecosystem, goods, and services. And when it takes that broad approach, it not only looks at habitats, working lands, communities, but parks and open space. And so I also think that when you talk about green infrastructure, you're talking about reducing our carbon footprint, or using a roof to put either solar on it or a green roof as green infrastructure. And so I'm bothered by the fact that we don't have a set of terms that we can agree upon. And in this definition, I can look at the parks program and their contributions, which is why I've insisted on some of the language in that, as well as in the public facilities, as well as I can see how green space has been applied within the PSA for buffering. And so when you have these different programs of green space, open space, green infrastructure, AFD, PDR, TDR, and all the rest of it, when I look at the analysis, I don't see some place that says we're trying to protect both inside and outside of the PSA. And here are the different tools that we can use to be able to get those ecosystems, goods, and services. So when I look at the recommendation for the PSA, and you talk about a clear preservation of objectives and mapping, why wouldn't you want to do that outside of the PSA also? And that's why I got confused when I looked at your future land use map description and development standards, and I get down to this one paragraph that you've added in there that talks about community character, conservation, open space, and it applies specifically to within the PSA. So I don't quite understand what you're doing here.
Just to respond, I think fair criticism on several points. You can certainly have a broader definition of green infrastructure. I think there would be a benefit to having some clarity of terms in overall policy framework, things like rural lands, green space, open space, rural character. And then I do think that, green infrastructure mapping could be applied within the PSA as well as outside. Particularly, it would be helpful in the recommendation where we're saying you should have eligibility requirements for purchase of development rights areas, and the green infrastructure could be applied within the PSA to that program.
Well, when we looked at I'm sorry, you're right. But we looked at the mapping piece, and we're talking about what we're trying to preserve. I would have hoped that the mapping would be the first thing as a GSA of the rural areas that we would want to define what it is we want to preserve or how we're going to get funding. So I'm back to Tammy's original report, and you allude to the DCR piece. But there's a mapping that specifically tells us what those habitat areas, forest areas, agriculture areas are of high value in the county, but yet we're not going to use those sort of criteria to decide what we want to preserve, or using them as a mechanism to be able to get the matching funding. I'm flabbergasted.
I think those the state data sets could definitely be used to make this green infrastructure mapping. I don't think we said which data sets to use, but I think certainly what DCR has and other data sets would be the core of it.
That was in Tammy's paper where she suggested it that preceded this.
And Tammy has her hand up, so she can jump in on this discussion. Go ahead, Tammy.
Yes, I just wanted to echo what Vlad was saying, that the absence of pointing to that doesn't exclude it from being used. It's still the intention that would be the foundation of what we might do moving forward. We were just trying to separate out what might be the level of detail appropriate to this paper or to the comprehensive plan versus what might be done programmatically. And as we alluded to earlier as well, there's a bit of evolution that's taking place within our comprehensive plan sections, where we're coming to more and more details to be added and sort of things to be tied together. So the fact that it's omitted does not mean that it wasn't considered or wouldn't be used.
I understand that, and that's not the point of using some tool to do that. It's the criteria that's associated with using tools like that you decide to use to prioritize what money gets spent to, whether it's inside or outside of the PSA. So, and when you take a broader perspective of what we're trying to protect, like with a green infrastructure, you realize that when you're spending money on parks or buying Freedom Park or Chickahominy, you're doing all those things too. So the toolbox is a lot broader than what is being proposed here if you don't take a broader look at the problem space. And so when it comes to the criteria of how you spend money, this paper and none of the papers talk about why anybody should say, let's put $1.5 million aside every year for a PDR program outside of, we know that it's a good idea. What's the criteria that's going to drive these things? And these papers should have told us that.
So is there a next step in this, or?
Yes, I suggested in the GSA piece that we put the mapping first and we establish the criteria so that when you get that $1.5 million in the first year, you get that tool set straight so that you can justify the mapping dollars.
Okay. Vlad or Tammy, any additional thoughts on that? And we will be getting to the GSAs as we move along as well. So, but for now, any comments, Vlad or Tammy?
Well, Tammy may want to clarify this. I'm still a little confused, honestly. As I understand, Ms. Polster, you're recommending that we actually specifically state which criteria should be used for I guess being inside the green infrastructure mapping or not, as well as which criteria you'd use for purchase of development rights program. And as I understand the state criteria, the state programs and federal programs, they all have different sets of criteria. So I guess I was saying in an earlier comment that my recommendation would be to make broad enough criteria in your comprehensive plan so that they support any of these funding programs, but then you can refine them for a specific grant application.
I would be good with that, but I don't see the start of that.
I understand.
Anybody else?
Perhaps that's a follow on. Yep.
Yep. Okay. And we will be getting to the GSAs, if not this afternoon, at the next meeting. But any other comments on Vlad's report at this point? Okay. And just a reminder, there's still a couple hands up. Tammy and Frank, your hands are up. Wanted to make.
Oh, mine is an error.
Oh, okay. All right.
That was mine.
Okay. All right. Thank you all. Okay. Does it go back to Vlad at this point, or who's taking the next step here?
This is Thomas. I can pick it up from here.
Okay.
If that works for you.
Sure.
The next thing on the agenda is the economic opportunity area analysis, which was prepared by the consultant team. And this document is an analysis of the current economic opportunity designation, as well as includes comparisons with peer communities. This document also includes an analysis of how the designation correlates with the scenario planning effort and the place types that are used in the preferred scenario framework. Overall, the two key recommendations from this paper is that the economic opportunity designation should be kept as its own land use designation, and that the county should consider the public master planning of areas designated for EO to better ensure the fulfillment of the intent of this designation. Much of the EO analysis and recommendations might be best discussed in the context of the land use map descriptions and development standards, which I am going to be presenting here shortly, but I can pause here and see if the working group had any specific questions for Vlad and his team regarding this paper on the EO designation.
Any questions or comments? Okay, go ahead, Thomas.
Rich, excuse me, I have a couple. Couldn't get myself unmuted a little bit.
Okay.
Are we going into specifics on economic opportunity, or was this just the 30,000 feet?
I was just giving the 30,000 feet on the paper, but we do have Vlad here. So if there were some specific questions about the paper, I think now would be a good time to give Vlad the question.
Thanks. I have two. In the analysis, Toano and Anderson's Corner are lumped together. I found that, well, I'm not sure I agree with that. And also with regard to Toano, there's a quote, "In order to support Toano as the commercial center of this part of the county, retail commercial is not a recommended use unless accessory to the recommended uses." And I was just wondering why you wouldn't have retail commercial as a recommended use. So those are my two questions.
This is Vlad. I'm sorry, I can't quite answer that. It sounds like it was something from just copied from the land use chapter itself.
No, maybe you're right.
Because I don't think we would have made those kind of specific recommendations for Toano. And that's probably why they were grouped together. I don't know. I'll look for the specific page for those, but that's my recollection.
Good deal. Thank you.
Anybody else? Frank?
I'm struggling with the Anderson Corner mixed use and what that encompasses. And we have language that specifically talks about the EO when it was defined just as the Taylor Farm, that said that there's enough mixed use outside and around and don't do it. And then we've got some language that gets to some guidelines that apply to the mixed use area, then I'm not sure, unless there's a level of detail, that I would agree with this language at all. And so, for example, there's the overlap between Tohanna and Anderson Corner, and we added 2 parcels, the Hertzler and the one above it, into the mixed use when it's the middle of a general industry, which is currently, and probably ought to stay that way as opposed to mixed use. And so it's what we're calling these things by parcel without having sorted it out and then putting a label of mixed use over the entire thing, when some of it is in B1 that's going to stay B1. We've got PDR properties in there that aren't part of this. And so I'm still back to this notion of being a little bit more detailed to the vision. And the same thing applies to the Croker interchange and now what's left of the Hill Pleasant Farm EO. And not looking, master planning one, but not looking at the mixed use piece that you now have, where you've broadened the quadrants by including more parcels into it, and you've extracted some out of the other. And you're going to master plan an EO, but not have any vision or structure to the specifics of what you're going to do with those other quadrants. I don't understand that. And we've talked about this vision piece and being specific about these. And so I am glad to see within the structure of the technical paper that we have, and in the land use development piece, that we've made a nice attempt to keep language that is specific about no mixed use in the Anderson Corner EO, but yet we're going to start talking about design guidelines pretty soon, and the whole area is considered mixed use. So I'm having a little bit of a problem of taking the land use development standards, keeping some of the old one, putting some new stuff in there. And I'm still stuck on this idea when we get to the design guides with the same thing here of putting a 4 or 5 story building on any of those areas. So there's a little bit of specific language that I'd be more comfortable about if I saw the details for both the Anderson Corner and the Croker, as well as those overlapping areas for some of these things, like between Tohanna and Anderson Corner, or Norge and Tohanna, and how these things start to fit. And that can be done in different papers, but I want to see I'd like to see all of it kind of clearly laid out. And this is just a piece of it.
Okay. Yep. And Thomas or Vlad, if you had wanted to comment on that.
Oh, I think that makes perfect sense. And that actually might be a good segue to move on to the descriptions and development standards presentation and discussion. I certainly don't want to cut off anybody else in the working group who had questions about the paper, but if not, I'm happy to roll into that part of the discussion.
Okay. I don't see any other hands up, so why don't you go ahead and do that, Thomas?
Perfect. Well, your packet also contains proposed revisions to the future land use map descriptions and development standards. And within this section, there have been no content substantial changes to the description of the primary service area or the section that's titled Relationship between the Comprehensive Plan, Future Land Use Map, and Zoning Ordinance District Map for areas with residential designations, which is a bit of a mouthful. Within the newly titled Land Use Designation Descriptions and Development Standards portion, there are a number of revisions that follow for each of these designations. At the start, the section clarifies that the designation descriptions and development standards describe preferred uses, intensities, and general development characteristics for each district, and that the character design guidelines describe the preferred design guidelines for different land uses. And of course, staff's hope is that those items will be compatible with one another and fulfill the vision that you all are going to help us lay out here. Both are to be consulted to ensure that proposals and plans are compatible with each of these expectations moving forward. At this point, the economic opportunity designation has been largely untouched, except for the removal of the reference to private partnerships leading the master planning of these areas. This is in accordance with the consultant's recommendation that the county initiate or facilitate the master planning of these areas. The staff certainly desires the working group's input on this recommendation and its inclusion in the plan. Moving on from that, and of course, we'll have a chance to discuss all of this. Based on the working group's feedback, the open space or recreation designation has been revised as community character conservation, open space or recreation, and includes a more detailed descriptions of the properties that are appropriate for this designation. The Williamsburg-Jamestown Airport designation and the federal, state, or county land designations have been slightly revised, with the eastern state portion being updated to set a clearer vision of how potential redevelopment of the parcel is to occur with regards to mitigating impacts and preserving or establishing the appropriate character. Staff has also included revisions to the designation description and development standards for rural lands. These are pending, of course, working group discussion on the open space and rural character analysis, and are certainly able to be further revised, as all of these are. And there's a sample development concept for rural lands within the packet, and this is an illustration of what kind of proposal represents the policies that are expressed within the document. Regarding the residential designations, both the low density residential and the moderate density residential designations have been revised to address some of the concepts from public input, as well as what's been shown in the scenario planning. Perhaps most notably is the revision to the moderate density residential language to include 2 levels of potential density and standards, with the higher level of density being based on meeting certain locational criteria in the description box. And there's also a sample development concept for low density residential that's been included within the packet. Regarding non-residential land uses, the commercial industrial designations were revised to reference the character design guidelines and the floor area ratio for the commercial uses. And of course, regarding mixed use, the basic description for all mixed use designations was updated to provide the general expectations. However, it is worth noting, and I think Mr. Polster touched a little bit on this earlier, that the individual mixed use designation descriptions have remained and include some revisions. And the intent of these descriptions is to guide development such that the specific vision of each mixed use area is honored and fulfilled by proposed development. So as such, future development is expected to fit this vision while also being guided by the general mixed use description, the appropriate character design guidelines, and the expectations laid out throughout the comprehensive plan. So that is a very high level summary of what has been shown within the revisions in this document. And at this point, I'm happy to turn things over to you all for questions and discussion on anything that you want to focus on this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Frank, let me do Julie first and then Frank.
Thank you. I did go through, and I would like to see more explanation about the difference between zoning and the future land use designation in the land use map. I proposed some language, and I'm going to submit that to staff, but I just want to give everybody a heads up that I would really like to see that explained better for people who may not be familiar with the differences between zoning, and the legal aspects of zoning, and the guidelines aspect of the land use designations.
That's a good point, Julie. Thank you. And so you said you're going to send something in on that?
Right. I mean, I'm assuming nobody wants, because presumably the staff will take a look at what I've proposed and make changes to make it more appropriate. Thanks.
Yep. Thank you. Frank.
One of the things I liked about Vlad's community character conservation open space is that at the end of it, he had a set of first principles. And the one first principle that I liked very much was that the rural character is both inside and outside of the PSA. So when I look at this new addition to this paper where it says community character conservation open space, it's unclear that principle is here. When I read it 3-4 times, it sounds like it's just inside of the PSA, even though it talks about the word rural in there. So if we can take that first principle, that rural character is both inside and out of the PSA, and that the things that we're talking about apply to both, that's back to the green infrastructure, the green space, and all the rest of it. Mm-hmm. I think that would help clarify that.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable. Thomas, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, that's a very helpful comment.
Yeah.
And I think take a look and make the proper revisions for sure.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Thank you, Frank.
One of the things that I suggested in the paper that I wrote here is when you take a look at Anderson Corner, if he pulls that up. Or maybe he can't. Anyhow, when you get to that Anderson Corner and you look underneath that one title, it talks about a UDA designation. And the Anderson Corner is a village type thing. And I would feel more comfortable as we go down and relook at the wording in here to try to get it a little bit clearer between the old comp plan and the vision that's there and what's being proposed in the paper for these clusters, district centers or neighborhood centers or rural centers. It's proposed in Vlad's paper. Mm-hmm. That we look at the UDA designation and what's being proposed in here and look at the standards that the UDA and what the mixed use may be applying to Anderson Corner in terms of story, how high. Mm-hmm. So the UDA for the Anderson Corner village type thing says absolutely nothing over 3. And it talks about that area, not only about where the EO is going to be, but the surrounding rural area and characteristics. And so I think somewhere in this language that goes into this chapter, the same thing would apply to the Croker. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to look at that Croker interchange and the EO there, what are we talking about that thing looking like based on what was proposed here? High density residential, medium density residential. So there has to be some definition mm-hmm. that's being proposed in Vlad's paper and mm-hmm. the UDA that gets us a little closer to what we're going to have into it. And my example is I don't want a 5-story building on Croker. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't want to look like the interchange on 199 with Williamsburg.
Yeah. And I think your point is well taken that these UDAs really should have a good descriptor specifically saying what the vision, because the vision for each one could be significantly different. And so a broad brush doesn't work, but you need to specifically address each one is what you're saying.
And so whether it's Tohano and looking at the corner piece, and that one's also a UDA village, yeah. There ought to be some guiding pieces of this. Guidelines. Mm-hmm. But something more than just telling me mixed use. Mm-hmm. Okay, mm-hmm. that I'm looking for some refinement of what we're actually saying.
Yep. Thomas, is that workable from your end?
Certainly, and just to clarify, Mr. Polster, are you looking for that refinement, I'm assuming within this actual chart where we've got the individual unique descriptions for each area? You want that to be refined and clarified.
Exactly. So that we don't run into a problem of here's a mixed use area for Anderson Corner and it can have a 5-story building in it, as opposed to here's a UDA and it's going to be mixed use. There's going to be a combination of those in those areas. It's going to end up that way. I understand. But we're not going to allow a 5-story building. It's going to be a 3-story. And the same thing for Tohana and Croker. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not saying what the answer is, because you'll need to balance those two, but it ought to be specific to.
Yep. Good. Thank you, Frank. Ginny, you had your hand up for a while, and Julie, I see your hand is still up. So Ginny, go ahead.
Thank you. Question on section 10 on affordable and workforce housing. It's on page 13. 2 questions. One is the line about affordable and workforce housing should be provided at certain targeted incomes is struck out. And I don't remember whether we decided that affordable housing ought to end at 80% of area median income. If we did, I don't think it hurts to repeat it. That's one point. And then item D, public benefit in this area is most effectively achieved through provision of units or dedication of land. I really didn't see the point in that. It doesn't say much to me. So I would suggest just striking the whole thing.
And Ginny, just so you know, you were fading in and out as you were speaking. I think we were able to get most of the context, but I don't know if you were walking with your phone or not, but that it was fading in or out. But
I was moving back and forth from the microphone.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Sorry.
That's all right. Thomas, did you have a response on that?
Oh, well, no, I appreciate the input, of course. I think the public benefit language in letter D is what's currently adopted within the plan. So certainly staff can look at removing that, but I would want to check in with folks on my end to see if anyone has a spark of, oh, here's the memory from why that language was specifically included. So I'll check in and see if perhaps Ellen or Tammy have some background information on that language. But either way, certainly staff can take a look.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Julie, did you have another comment?
Yes, I did. If we go back to the community character conservation, open space or recreation section, I don't see provision there for the parcels we've been talking about, such as the parcel across from Windsor Mead Marketplace. And I think there were some others when we're talking about land use changes. And that's the discussion we've had about that parcel is we just don't want to add to the traffic. We don't want to add to the congestion. We don't want to add to the street, damage the streetscape. Seeing those trees there is a little reminder of what this county is all about. And there are other parcels in the county that we've talked about having the same way. So those, in a way, are little community character buffers throughout the county. And I just didn't see language in this section that would provide for that kind of designation for those little pocket parcels.
Now, would that be dependent on the outcome? You're referring to the parcel that was the land use application that you proposed for that area, Julie? And
the land use application was I can't remember what we were going to make it, but it was going to be a strip shopping center, and we said no. Right. And in our discussion, or preliminary discussions about that parcel, we talked about just designating it to stay the way it is and making it some kind
I remember that. And
recreation space.
Yeah, and I think until that particular designation change is actually approved, I don't know if the wording could go in there. That's sort of a question on my end that I'll ask staff to weigh in on. But that might be the reason why there's not a specific descriptor for that parcel. Unless I misunderstood your suggestion.
No, I'm just talking about in general, because we talked about the advisability or the desirability of having a designation within the PSA where we could say, look, this parcel, we really don't want to see anything developed on it, ever. And just saying, for our desired preferred wish list, we would prefer not to see anything on this parcel.
I see.
And just in general, it would be nice to have a designation for that.
For just general parcel in the.
I think there were some that came up on Long Hill Road as well.
Yeah.
Where we talked about perhaps just preserving those.
Okay. Ellen?
Yes. I think we can have further conversation. I think the designation language, each one needs to have kind of a clear and unique intent to it. And I think staff did our best to draft some language that basically took what was there before, the open space and recreation language, and broadened it a little bit. But I think, again, tried to keep that about certain values that are identified there. So I don't know if that directly responds, and maybe Thomas would want to add to that, but that's our starting point there.
Thomas? Go ahead, Julie. Go ahead.
What I don't see there is provision for us saying we'd like to have a buffer to preserve a streetscape or to relieve pressure on traffic, just in general, to preserve a buffer and help keep congestion down within the PSA.
You mean wording to the effect that there are areas within James City County that would benefit from a buffer, as you just described it? Is that what you're getting at?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
We're not protecting a particular architectural, historic, environmental property. We are simply providing a pocket of green space in an otherwise developed area.
Okay. Tim?
It's just a technical question. I mean, can we do that? I just don't understand how we can simply, and maybe it's my naivete, but I don't know how we can simply designate something as is now as a park or something like that. With, to me, this is sort of one of those places where, if you had a PDR program, that's where it goes into place. But it's, again, I'll defer to staff for that.
Ellen?
Sorry, I actually hadn't taken my hand down in time, but
okay. Okay.
This is Julie again. I'm just wondering, isn't there a way that we could, if we don't designate these pocket parks or whatever we want to call them in the comprehensive plan, how are we going to make them candidates for PDR or for green space funds if they're not called out somehow?
Go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's a very interesting question. And to sort of circle back a little bit, I think to build off what Ellen was saying, part of our approach to this land use designation was trying to build off the previously existing language and to expand it to be a little bit more inclusive of the existing parcels within the county that, for example, have historic or scenic easements, that have national or local historic significance, county facilities and things like that. So I think at this point, it's fair to say that this designation is more about capturing what exists that's significant to the county. And it sounds like there's some interest in, well, okay, that's all well and good, but what if in the future we wanted to find properties for PDR? How do we have those properties fall into a land use designation? And I think that's a really interesting question. I will say for the actual land use application, which we won't get into tonight, but staff is going to have draft language that would be relevant to each application to show consistency at that point. So if it would be okay for us to hold off on talking about that application until our upcoming meeting in March, I think that might be beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
But I certainly understand that point about how do we tackle the PDR and how do we approach properties that maybe the county wants to proactively preserve. And, Tammy, I don't know if you have anything to add to that or any thoughts, but I welcome your input as well.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Croft, would it be okay if I respond?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Tammy.
Okay, thank you. I think both historically and currently, we haven't captured target properties, so to speak, on the land use map. That's been a blend of an evolving and dynamic mapping exercise that's sort of hard to capture on a land use map, as well as having some confidentiality and sensitivity issues with respect to things that might be of a speculative nature and part of potential real estate negotiations. So in essence, over the long term, our public facilities mapping or our conservation mapping we tried to do in a much more reactive way than a proactive way, so as not to get ahead of ourselves and to use the programs to capture more descriptively how we want to go about getting those properties, rather than and what type of properties we might want, rather than calling them out on a map.
Okay. Frank, I saw your hand was up. Was this on Julie's
Yes,
point? Or okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
I find myself agreeing with Tim more than I can believe. But this conversation takes me right back to the beginning of how we started with Jose on community character corridors and community character areas. And so one of the things that hasn't been updated, which is I think Julia's point, is we've moved on since those corridors and those areas were initially put in. And we haven't gone back to look at Monticello and realize that there is nothing else that we can do to that traffic. I mean, the VDOT guys have said, that's it. We've spent all the money and all the rest of it. And so now we have this issue of the Monticello corridor that we have this problem on. And why wouldn't you want to, as a corridor, apply the guidelines that we already have about view sheds, green space, open space to this area, to this corridor, and specifically that area, as well as all the way down, which is when you get further down on Monticello, we do have areas that the county has bought through PDR to protect those areas. So why wouldn't we want to be able to take the Windsor Mead or any other properties that have now become so congested, which is why we did the Route 5 language to protect all those forests and views. Why wouldn't we want to do this for Monticello or look at other areas in the county where the development has gotten to the point where maybe we need to step in and say, here are the things that we want for that corridor, which is what I think Julia wants to say.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so why don't we have Thomas, to his earlier comment, take a look at this in context and then report back on that issue? Because I got the sense that you felt that was a very interesting suggestion of how to identify these types of parcels for a green space or buffer type use, and that's not addressed in the document right now.
Oh, yes, I mean, I think it's a very interesting policy question, certainly, that we can think about and mull over. Okay. And it just so helps get the working group's input on the different ways they're thinking about approaching it, for sure.
Okay, good. Anybody else?
I'm sorry, I do, because I'm back to tooting Jack's horn on recommended density for the rural areas, where we're once again saying, hey, put it all in the PSA, don't put it in any of the rural areas. But yet what we're trying to do with that language is get to a apples and apples, as opposed to making land use decisions that you don't need to make, that model suggests for 120,000 folks. I absolutely agree with Jack on that. I don't know why. And that's what that language says in that paragraph. That was a new addition, by the way, and it goes back to his previous comment.
And for the group, could someone read that language?
Residential development is intended to occur inside the primary service area. Residential development recommended uses and is discouraged outside of the primary service area in the rural lands. Mm-hmm. Residential, agricultural, It's okay. The point that Jack made.
And I guess the question I had on Jack's point was, I thought the intent of scenario B was to direct population growth inside the PSA. And that's why we're talking about these policies like changing the by right in rural lands for residential development from 1 to 3 to some other number, or to put more emphasis on clusters with surrounding, large expanses of open space. So
that's true, Rich. No, you're absolutely true.
Mm-hmm.
But when you did that, you designated Anderson Corner as mixed use,
mm-hmm.
and you took the 120,000 and you made sure that it was all inside of the PSA, as opposed to scenario A, which had it outside. But what you did is, when you said it was going to be mixed use as a land use piece,
mm-hmm.
it became a by right. And my point is, we don't need to make a by right decision that accommodates 120,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need to do that. Not that there's anything wrong with all the other things that you just talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so forget about the apples to apples, and realize that the land use map that we're going to look at after everything is done and said is to give a by right mixed use 120,000 people, above what we have right now, which is about 100,000 by right. So if you have 85% of that right now by right, why would I want to mortgage the future of this county by approving now that ability to grow to that level? I don't need to make that decision, in my view.
Ellen?
Understanding that that's a much larger point, I think that there is just an intent to provide some context by starting the paragraph that way. But certainly the paragraph could begin at residential development is not a recommended use, and go from there in terms of the language here, if that would be more comfortable to the commission.
I'm okay with that.
I think that's a good compromise. Tim, I see you have your hand up.
Just a clarifying thing, and maybe I missed something, but Anderson's Corner isn't currently zoned mixed use, is it? I mean, I know there's some portions that are, but the larger tract is business up front and EO in the rear, isn't
mm-hmm.
it?
Yeah, that's my understanding too. Yep.
So
I'm sorry, Tim.
So I just, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to wrap my head around it, Frank. That's why I'm asking
that's fine. So let's talk to the consultant team. And I'm
going to stop you there, Frank. Paul has his hand up, so I think he's going to throw some clarification on it. Go ahead, Paul.
No, that's okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So just to put a little bit finer point on it because I know Mr. Polster was maybe using the term by right in more of a metaphorical or conceptual context, but for the larger viewing public, and again, just to make sure we're sort of all on the same page, I just for the sake of the record, will remind the future land use map and the comp plan is just a policy document, a long-range policy document. I wouldn't want anybody to get confused, because to Mr. O'Connor's point, as part of this comprehensive plan and as part of the development of the future land use map, we are not changing the zoning on anybody's land. And so the future land use map in this policy document comes into place for future legislative action. The zoning that determines what is by right development, that's going to stay on the ground. That's a zoning category, which is a very different, I think Ms. Leverin said it really well earlier, that has legal implications as the zoning ordinance and the zoning of the property is not changing. This is just a policy guidance document. And again, sorry for belaboring that point and just trying to differentiate between the two a little bit. Just wanted to make that clarity for the official record.
Yeah, I do understand that, Paul, but the issue is that once you make that policy decision in a land use, it logically follows that the landowner can come in based on the comp plan and ask for a zoning change. And so whether it's the mixed use area in Anderson Corner, or it's any of the RHD, RMD that would have taken residential property that's in the Armistead property of 300 acres and now makes it to mixed use, as opposed to one house to 8 acres, then that zone, that change to the comp plan allows for somebody to come in and ask for that zoning. And so that zoning, and when you look at the Model B, that designation on the mixed use land has transferred the population to those areas. So the population of 120,000 fits inside every one of those land use changes. And I'm just suggesting that we don't need to make those land use changes to accommodate the 120,000. And by the way, the Armistead property accommodates 3,000 of that 120,000.
Paul, did you have an additional comment?
No, again, point taken, but, and certainly, as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't, I understand Mr. Polster's concept about setting up the application. At the end of the day, anybody can come in and ask for a rezoning or a legislative case. I think to as you all certainly have seen over the last couple of years, as you all deliberate land use applications and as you all deliberate legislative cases, that comp plan provides guidance that certainly does not imply that those legislative cases are sort of otherwise sort of guaranteed. I mean, certainly there's the ability for Planning Commission to review and recommend for and against a case, and ultimately the board gets to decide whether or not that specific approval, that specific development proposal under the legislative case is either approved or denied. We sort of have, I think we've got a lot more conversation to come to the Planning Commission working group, not necessarily tonight, but as we continue on with our subsequent meetings. I know we'll get a chance to chat more about this a little bit as we get into the land use application scenario a little bit later. Certainly using the population control totals does not mean necessarily that growth will ever take place. Certainly we've talked a lot about sort of market demand and market forces taking. I think the idea, as we've mentioned all along, about using the control totals is really just from a policy basis, being able to compare to compare different development scenarios and to better understand how that affects fiscal policy and transportation policy on a countywide basis. That's why we moved into the idea of the different models, the fiscal impact model and the transportation scenario model. It just helps to better inform because ultimately you plug those numbers into the models, it helps to make an informed decision about if that change sort of moves you more towards the comp plan vision or further away from the comp plan vision as you weigh those policy decision choices. So, again, I think it's important that we continue to use those control totals from a planning analysis and for what we're doing here is the comp plan. But certainly there's I think Vlad mentioned before that those population control totals, those employment control totals is not our goal. It is certainly not where the county is going to be built out as by the time we get there. So, as the conversation evolves, as we continue to get through some of these land use applications, and as we start to understand what some of the model is going to do for that, I think that will help to bring some of that into some additional clarity, I hope.
Good. Thank you, Paul. And Ellen, I see your hand is up.
Yes, although I was going to change tack slightly. So if there were another working group member who wanted to weigh in on that conversation, I don't know if you'd want to take their comment first.
Okay. All right. Anybody else? And I do see, I do see where Paul's going with his comment is that we're hoping that projection doesn't come about, but it's helpful to plan, to look at ways to for traffic and communications and growth and all that sort of thing. So I understand where Paul's coming from on that. Jack, you've had your hand up for a while, and then I'll go to Frank again.
Yeah, I too know the essence of what the points Paul making, and he's right. But we have to do more than hope. We don't get there. I think we have to proactively design a land use map that, and descriptions and designations and GSAs and the like, that has a capacity for residential growth far below 120,000. And that includes significantly reducing the residential capacity in the rural lands, but also in agricultural lands within the PSA, and having open space between the UDAs. I've made that point a number of times, and I hope we can do it. And that sort of thing. So that's the essence of my point, I guess.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other hands at this point. So Ellen, go ahead.
Oh, thanks very much. Yes, again, this is only a piece of that larger discussion, but while the screen was resting on this, just wanted to take a moment, and I'm sure you all have already noticed, currently within that gray paragraph we've been looking at, which is new text, it says should occur at a density of no greater than X acres per resident. And certainly we're not looking for a firm answer from you all tonight, or even necessarily a starting answer, as I know you all will be wanting to look at the round 3 public engagement results along with all the rest of the public engagement. But should this draft language be acceptable, we would be looking to update that through our conversations in the coming meetings with both the public input and the very helpful background information that Vlad and his team have provided in that briefing paper. So just wanted to note that particular item there. Thank you.
Okay. And also, as we work through, especially trying to put in a number for the X as far as what we're thinking of for by right development in A1 zoning, that'll be a great opportunity when we have the joint work session with the Board of Supervisors in May to, we'll be further along in our discussions with that, and that'll be a great item to put out on the agenda and get some supervisor feedback on changing by right development in A1. So referencing Ellen's point, there's still some work we've got to do on that, but to keep it in the back of our minds that this is something that we need to address. Let's see, Frank.
In the residential chapter, underneath item 6, there's open space design, and then it continues. And I don't know if that only applies to the residential and nobody else, because I don't see it in the mixed use. And I'm assuming that when it's saying residential, whether or not you're inside of the PSA or outside of the PSA, we want you to be cognizant of these things. So maybe I don't understand what we're trying to say when we're only singling out residential as opposed to applying it to every place else in this chapter.
That's a good question. Staff, any comment?
You're fading, Rich.
Oh, okay. I said that's a very good question, and then I'm asking staff if they have any comment on that.
I could jump in and just start off by saying that the formatting there is the reason, or sorry, where it has continued in parentheses, it's just a relic of the past formatting. So we would certainly be cleaning that up to make that one unified box going forward. It's just difficult to work with both content and formatting at the same time sometimes. But to your other point, that language in there has primarily been used to guide the cluster overlay option within the zoning ordinance that applies to R1 and R2 zoned land. So it is primarily in this table to guide residential development. But the mixed use section references back and says that development in the mixed use designated areas should also reference back to the residential table and should also reference back to the commercial table and apply the applicable standards within those as well. So there is a connection there.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else? All right. Let's see who's next up. Thomas, do you still have the floor?
Certainly. Well, actually, the next thing on the agenda, if we are moving on from this item for now, will be the GSAs. And actually, Mr. Leininger will be presenting that and opening it up for discussion and review. So, Tom, I'll let you take it away.
Let me just interject for just a second. And I'm being conscious of the time. Depending on how in depth we get on the GSA discussions, we may have to stop it partway through and then pick it up at the next meeting, similar to what we did with community character tonight. So I just wanted to put that out there, but certainly because there's a couple more discussion items on our agenda for this evening. So I just wanted to make everybody aware of that. And Tom, go ahead. Sorry for the interruption.
Can I make a suggestion, Mr.
Sure.
Chairman?
Yep.
I really like the idea of what Jose did when he took all the comments that have been put in by everybody. And so when we went through the community character 2 weeks later, when my mind was fogged up after the thing, I just soon see us skip this, bring it back the next time, incorporate any of the changes that anybody has talked about, and then go through the document that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did like that technique Jose used as well. First of all, I'll ask the working group members, is that approach acceptable to you all?
I like it.
Yeah. Okay. And staff, can you work with that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And to Tom Leininger, I'm sorry we interrupted your thunder there, but you'll have the uninterrupted version at our next meeting. Ellen, were you going to say something?
No, although I guess I would interject and say we could reach out to you and seek your comments back, notating which ones you'd like to talk about. As far as scheduling it for a meeting, we may need to look at the schedule. We do have land use applications coming up next, and might hope to work with you all to figure out whether it's the next meeting or one of the subsequent ones, when the best time would be to bring that back. Would that be acceptable?
Yes, that's right, because that's right. March, we're almost into March. Hard to believe. So everybody's all right with that? Okay. All right, good. Any other comments? Frank, your hand was up, but it may just be from last time. Okay. All right. In that case, that's what we'll do. We'll come back for the GSAs at a future meeting. And the next item on the agenda is other items for discussion. And there's two items that we have for that. One is to do an amendment to our meeting calendar. You saw some email traffic about adding another meeting in March. And then I thought it'd be helpful if Ellen could give an overview of a high-level overview of what the next couple months are going to bring for the working group as far as what we'll be dealing with. So for both of those topics, I'll turn to Ellen.
Yes, thank you. And first of all, thank you all so much for sending emails with your availability for those dates in late March. It looked to staff as though the 24th would work the best. That was a former CPT meeting date. That CPT meeting was moved, and it's also 1 week prior to the March DRC meeting date. And believe 7 out of the 8 folks said that would work for them. So if so inclined, staff would look for an amendment to the calendar this evening so we could start communicating that to any citizens who are interested in upcoming meeting dates.
Okay, so if I could have a motion to amend the PCWG calendar to add a meeting for March 24th at 4 p.m. If I can have a motion for that.
This is Julie, so move.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right. And then the overview of coming next couple months, Ellen?
Yes, yeah, thank you. I will keep this brief, but would be glad to answer any questions. So coming up at the beginning of March, we will excitingly have some initial feedback for you regarding the round 3 results. So we would be planning to present that to you as well as the CPT in a joint meeting to start the meeting. And then following the joint meeting, hoping to start getting into the land use applications, which would also be a topic for the 22nd and now the 24th as well. If time allowed, we would hope perhaps to bring some elements of this land use chapter material back to you at those meetings as well. Moving into April and May, we would be bringing back the chapter document to you for some final reviews, and then also definitely the land use chapter materials in that time frame as well. All of that hard work, hopefully leading into a really good, productive joint meeting with the Board of Supervisors on May 25th, which we're likely thinking will be a prime opportunity to share the public input results overall, discuss PCWG recommended direction on items of particular note, and to discuss the PCWG recommendations on the land use applications. And from there, we'll certainly be back in touch with you all and approaching that date about next steps after that as well. So all of that, tentative to some degree, but that's what we're hoping to work with you all to achieve.
Good, great, thank you, Ellen. Any questions for Ellen on what she just reviewed?
Ellen, it's Barbara. What day in May was the joint meeting? The 25th?
Yes, correct, the 25th.
And that would be at what time?
1 o'clock.
Okay, thank you. Got it.
All right, anybody else? Nope. All right, any other discussion items before I ask for a motion to adjourn? Seeing none, may I have a motion to adjourn to the March 3rd Planning Commission meeting at 6 p.m.?
I'm happy to move for adjournment, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Thank you all very much.